Hey everyone! Welcome to another episode of the Modern Maker Workroom. I want to talk to you a little bit about what I'm going to do now because it's changing a little bit from the way that I've normally worked. Now, one of the things that I like to do is teach you how to do things, but I don't always tell you why I'm making the choices that I'm making. What can I say about working from a book that is 433 years old, right? Like, Diego de Fraile wrote this book in 1588, and he wrote it for the Spanish government. It was a practice of the Spanish government to hire tailors from around the nation to create books of patterns for the clothes, to both solidify the clothing as well as provide kind of a legal document that regulated how much fabric people were allowed to use for different kinds of garments. When I crack open one of these books, I'm able now to read the Spanish fairly easily and can translate it fairly quickly without too much trouble. But what I'm really interested in is some of the proportions are very odd. Like the collars in a lot of these are extremely, extremely tall. And the one that you're going to see me cut is definitely the height that is given in the manual. But what's funny to me is that there aren't any extant garments from the time periods that have those collars that are so ridiculously tall. And I want to see what that's like. But going even further, to use the same layout, to use the book as it was originally intended by an author from, almost half a millennia ago. Like, there's something that is almost magical about using this book and reading what they wrote and hearing their voice in the words that are given. Like in the early portions of the book, Fraile describes the practice of tailoring as a professional, like how you're supposed to run your shop, how you should interact with your employees. And I think that it's such a great window into what a person's experience was like in the time period, right? So often we have this very distant feeling from individuals in the time period. Only when we're reading diaries or stories that are written by individuals do we really get an eye into the truth that people as humans haven't really changed all that much. Like, we're very much the same kind of cultural creatures that we were 500 years ago. Our clothes have changed, our technology has changed, the ease with which we move through the world is different. There's something truly special about it. And I hope that you'll enjoy it. So let's get started. I've rambled on long enough. Let's put some chalk down onto cloth and cut out a coat. When I'm chalking directly onto the cloth, the first thing that I need to establish is the back pattern piece. And to do that, I have to know very clearly what the back shape is from the hem all the way to the collar. So the first thing that I'll do is to establish that shape. And then once I have that, I can work my way out from center back across the cloth. But I can't even draft the front until I've drafted the back. Unlike when we're drafting on paper, where we start with the center back and then work our way down and kind of out from the waist, here we have to establish center back, but then also work our way up from the hem. And that is a little bit awkward if you're not really familiar with the shape of the pattern. It truly becomes somewhat of an artistic endeavor because you can see that I'm having to really know what the center back shape is going to be, and I just have to draw it in, and I'm using my eye to tell me whether it's correct or not. I've drawn the shape hundreds of times, I should know, and yet it's terrifying every single time I do it. Without any obvious grid to keep me on track when I'm drafting, I have to start looking at the geometry. So I'm drafting perpendicular to the center back line that I've drawn. Now the neck width is 1/12 of the chest, and the neck height is 1 dedo, which is 1/48 of the chest. As soon as I have those marked, I will also draw the shoulder slope, which is 2.5 dedo, measured down from the high point of shoulder at the side neck. Before I can draw the side of the collar and the shoulder slope, I need to make sure that I have the length of the shoulder identified as well. And that is measured from the high point at the side neck to the shoulder slope guideline, and the length should be OI and a half from the chest tape. And the height of the collar above the high point of the shoulder at the side neck should be OI as drawn with the length tape. Once all of those measurements are in place, then the side of the collar and the shoulder can be drawn as one continuous, tightly curved line. The curve at the side of the neck is quite a tight little crook, blending into something that's quite straight at the extremity. So it should be a fairly straight line approaching the top of the collar, as well as a fairly straight line approaching the end of the shoulder. With the neckline and shoulder area complete, our next task then is to find the bottommost part of the back armhole. In this case, the distance is measured down from the high point of shoulder, SII, or 1/6 plus 2 dedo, and then it's measured out from the center back line 1 dedo less than Q, so IQ, and those are both measured with the chest tape. As we continue to work our way down the pattern piece toward the hem, our next location is the waist. Now we've marked where its level is, now we just have to find its width. And in this case, the width is SII as measured with the chest tape. Now we could measure this with the waist tape, but we're trying to keep the pattern in proportion to itself. The front is begun at the hem simply by drawing the shape in right at the edge of the fabric, and I'm sorry a little bit of it is out of frame. The front hem width is TIII, or possibly slightly wider to TD. Regardless, in my case, the pattern pieces are large enough that they overlap, so that means I'll have to do some piecings later on. But the hem width is drawn, and then I find the length of the back skirt at the side, and I match that to the front skirt, and I cast a curve. Then I use this curve to mark the width of the waist, and I know that anywhere it hits on that curve, that the side of the skirt will be correct. I repeat this process with the side back from the waist to the armhole by taking my tape and measuring that length and then casting a curve with my tape and my chalk. And in this way, I will continuously work my way up the pattern from the top of the blade back down to the chest, and then from the chest to the top of the neck at the front. And this process of walking my way around the pattern shape becomes quite second nature. To find the chest level and the bottom of the armhole, I'll measure down along the side back edge of the front 2 dedo from the chest tape. And from there, I can work my way out to the selvage edge where center front is, and then from there I'll work my way up toward the neck. Now that I know where the chest level is, I'm going to measure from center front along that level QI and a half. And that leads me to the bottommost part of the armhole. And once it's there, then I can just rough in the back shape of the armhole. We'll finish up the front now by measuring up from that chest level. So I'm measuring Q and a half. Once I have that height, then I can measure the neck width, which is measured at D and a half off of the center front line at the selvage, or if you're like me and have very erect posture, you'll measure CO from the selvage edge, and that cants the neckline backwards and makes the shoulders slightly more crooked, which gives you room to adjust for a fuller chest. No matter where you're placing the neckline, the depth from the high point of shoulder is D and a half, and the width from that point is also D and a half, giving you a 1/4 circle D and a half measurement, and then wherever your center front ends up, you connect that to your chest line. For the erect posture, it will have an angle, and for the normal posture, it'll just be straight along center front. You should measure down from the high point of shoulder at the side of the neck about 3 dedo, and then carry that line out as your front shoulder slope, and the front shoulder is measured at 1/6 of the chest. The front width is measured down from the high point of shoulder, SII,
and the front width is the same. It is also SII, and that places the frontmost part of the armhole so that you have now all of the plot points to draw the shape of the armhole. Because there's so little fabric to waste, we are going to position our sleeve slightly at an angle just to facilitate a better usage of the material. So we're going to put this wrist in line with the shoulder, and it is 1/4 of the chest measurement. Once the wrist measurement is drawn, then we will draw 2 lines that are relatively perpendicular to that. Just as soon as I have the wrist opening, my very next task is to determine the overall length of the sleeve. Now, this particular sleeve, as drawn in the original layout, is 3/4 of the length tape long. So for those of you who are using non-Bara system measuring, that is 3/8 of your total height. Now, in this instance, I probably could have been a little bit lighter with my chalk drawing the cap of this sleeve because I'm not quite there in the right shape, and I ended up having to draw a couple of lines, and it got a little bit messy. But in general, the cap is a fairly shallow curve, the pit is a little bit deeper curve, and the cap side of the sleeve is a little bit larger than the underside of the sleeve because there's gathering involved in these proportions. Now, the length of the entire cap should be about 2/3 of the chest tape, and that leaves you quite a bit of room for gathering. Once the sleeve is drawn, then we'll take a moment and we'll draw the collar in the little offcut that comes in the armpit of the sleeve. We will just take our length tape and we'll measure straight off the cut edge about 1/6 of the length tape, and then we'll use the chest tape to measure right along the cut edge for the bottom of the collar, and that'll be 1/6 of the chest tape. The rest of the collar is pure art. It angles out slightly in front, and then once that front is in place, then we just curve up to meet the side. And that's it. It's done. Thank you so much for watching, and happy stitching.